We are slaying monsters.
Don't let the ghosts and the ghouls disturb you, darling.
So I was thinking about alien abduction the other day because yesterday Yotes, our cat, had to go to the vet. And, you know, we put him in the carrier, and he went in the carrier actually very easily, and we put him in the carrier, and then we picked him up, we took him outside, put him in the car, took him to this weird place that I'm sure to him smells very strange. People he had never seen before just like drag him out of the carrier, start poking and prodding at him. They gave him a shot. They shoved him back in the carrier, and then he just kind of appeared back at our house in the bathroom and came out of the carrier. And I was like, man, he probably thinks he was abducted by aliens. This feels exactly like what alien abduction is. And so it led me down this whole track of like, what if we are just pets for aliens?
Yes.
And then they have given us pets, and our pets are just like the stuffed mouse that Yotes carries around all the time. But alien abduction is just them taking us to alien doctors and doing medical procedures on us to give us checkups.
Yeah, to make sure we're all okay.
Make sure we're okay.
Yeah. I really think this theory holds a lot of water.
I mean, I definitely think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is clearly what's actually going on. We are alien pets.
Yes. I could live with that.
You know, it's funny because this came completely independently of the series that we're about to do, but that is sort of the concept behind Ed Walters and his whole interaction with the aliens.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's this whole kind of thread that he was actually maybe being tried to they were like catching him as a stray, and they were going to domesticate him, and they gave him like a pet name. His pet name was Zihas. And yeah, they were gonna like treat him like a dog. So yeah, I mean, he thinks they wanted to keep him as a pet, probably a dog. This story has a lot of dogs in it for some reason. We're gonna get dogs. We'll get naked women eventually.
Again?
Yeah.
I believe you mean skyclad.
No, skyclad women, but only visions of skyclad women.
Sure.
It's a very unique, like just quintessentially Florida story.
I love it. Give me that
Great.
Florida story.
Yeah.
Nice.
Exactly.
So yeah, we're slaying monsters.
Oh yeah.
We got Matty J across the table.
Hey.
We got Katie.
Hello.
And I'm EJ. And we got little Yotzi, the newly abducted Yotzi, sitting here with us as well.
Yotzi, tell us about your experiences. He just
doesn't
gives me
want
this
to.
look like I don't want to be involved in your shit.
Yeah.
He's like, I've been through enough, thank you.
He has been
bad
through
enough.
a lot.
Experiencer.
Yes.
But yeah, so today we are going to talk about the Gulf Breeze UFO encounter. This is, as I said, a very quintessentially Florida encounter. And in the process of doing this, it's going to be really cool because we're going to talk about the history of MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, why it developed, how it developed, and how the Gulf Breeze incident and Ed Walters and the credulity of this witness really divided the UFO community at the time, and is kind of a black spot in the history of MUFON. And I think it's interesting to look at that and consider what that means when it comes to the people who are doing these investigations and why it's important for us to come to these investigations with rational, open minds, thinking critically about all of the things. Because far too often, I think people come to something, you go to a haunted house, you go looking for Bigfoot, and, you know, you're in the haunted house looking for ghosts, not investigating phenomena. And they're different.
I think that along with being an interesting alien story, this is as much a story about a huge critical thinking failure on MUFON's part. And it's a conversation about that because it's kind of staggering how there was that big rift because of this.
And it's fascinating because, as we'll get to, there was another guy who did basically everything that Ed Walters did, down to like the way that he faked the photos and everything. Wow. And MUFON was very critical of him, but not very critical of Ed Walters.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, we'll talk about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, Florida is no stranger to weirdness. The Sunshine State, it's home to the skunk ape. You know, the skunk ape, that's Florida's Sasquatch. Also, Florida is home to a sinkhole that's allegedly a portal to hell. There's a jailhouse full of ghosts and a giant hammerhead shark called, for some reason, Old Hitler. And that's just the Fortean stuff. Absurd news pops up from Florida all the time. Like the time that a guy wore a "fuck the police" shirt to his court hearing. Or the person that threw an alligator through a drive-through window. Or the thousands of people who tried to shoot down a hurricane with their personal rifles.
Why don't I live there? It sounds like a laugh a minute.
Or the person who painted political messages on crabs and released them into Tampa Bay.
Oh, wow.
Fun.
It's kind of like Florida attracts weirdness.
So much animal abuse.
There is a lot of animal abuse. So in the late 1980s, it was totally on brand for Florida when a series of Polaroid photos hit the newspapers, allegedly showing some of the clearest UFO photographs ever. The photographer, himself an alleged contactee, would become the center of one of the greatest debates in the history of ufology, drawing battle lines not only between skeptics and believers, but actually amongst the believers themselves. Even today, despite very clear proof that the photos are fake, there is still a legion of credulous individuals who consider the Gulf Breeze images some of the most valuable evidence of visitations from another world. So the lore, legend, and truth of the Gulf Breeze UFO encounters will be the subject of this series. And my primary source for this series is Craig Meyer's book, War of the Words, the true but strange story of the Gulf Breeze UFO. And just so we're on the same page from the outset, the Gulf Breeze UFO photos are fakes. They were created using a model, and the photographer made a lot of money during the process of making them, and from the deals that happened afterwards. But as much as this story is about the incident and the photographer, Ed Walters, it's also a story of credulity. It's about what happens when we believe things so blindly and when we get so deep into our beliefs that we stop asking questions at all. Everything becomes this connection, this conspiracy link. And like I said, when we start doing investigations, I think it's important to always keep this in mind. Now, the story of these Florida UFO sightings actually starts in the American Midwest. UFOs, in the form of flying saucers, have been all the rage for a good 15 years or so at this point, starting with Kenneth Arnold's sighting in 1947 when he coined the term flying saucer. Katie, are you familiar with Kenneth Arnold?
I am familiar with Kenneth Arnold.
Yay!
Yeah.
Nice.
The originator, well, sort of. I mean, there were already UFO sightings prior to that, but
Yeah, it's
the real boom came from Kenneth Arnold.
It's hard to actually set like, oh, this was the original flying saucer. Well, Kenneth Arnold's the original flying saucer, but it's hard to say this is the original UFO sighting. I mean, we talked before on the 140 and about the 1896 airships sighting that happened across the country. You know, depending on who you talk to, they say Columbus saw something on his one voyage, you know, so where does it start? I don't really know. But
And War of the Worlds, Orson Welles'
sure.
radio broadcast really kicked off a little spurt too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and if we're talking like public consciousness, that's probably the thing that drove it into, because it was popular media, and media tends to be linked to these flaps when it happens, you know. So Kenneth Arnold, though, is the guy who coins the term flying saucer, and for the most part, brings about our like modern depiction of a UFO, which is, yeah, they don't look like school buses, you know, they look like saucers, two discs, one on top of the other. Now, Arnold had been flying in the Washington Cascade Mountains when he spotted a series of objects that were allegedly flying in formation. He calculated that formation covered about 5 miles in the air and traveled from Mount Adams to Mount Rainier in just 2 minutes. That's about a 50-mile distance, meaning that they would have to be traveling about 1,500 miles an hour, which is about twice the speed of sound. EJ, we talked about this before. Do you remember what he saw? Or what we believe he saw now?
He was in the sky when he saw this, right?
Yeah, he was in his airplane.
I remember this. Oh, man, it's vague. But was it just like a reflection or something? Or something like that?
Sort of.
Okay.
Katie, do you know? You heard this?
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
Okay, yeah. So we believe now that he saw what's called a superior mirage of the Washington Cascades.
Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
So that's an anomaly. It's a weather anomaly that happens when a temperature inversion causes light to bend and distort objects in weird ways. The colder air of the mountains was surrounded by the warmer air of the sky, which created the mirage and created these like shimmery objects that he saw around him. Sometimes you'll even see this where it looks like things are floating above the horizon. You'll see it on in the ocean. You can see pictures. If you Google Superior Mirage, you can see pictures of ships that look like they're sailing above the surface of the ocean because the light is actually bending thanks to this Superior Mirage effect.
Is that how we get like oases in the desert? Is that the same effect?
I would think so, because it's the same kind of shimmery reflection type of appearance, and it would make sense that the hot and cold temperature inversion would be affected there as well.
Yeah.
I assume so.
I wonder how many other alien sightings were because of this.
Probably quite a few.
Quite a few. Mm-hmm. Probably even to this day, like you could probably explain away a lot of them because of this.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll probably get into this later, but a large majority of UFO sightings are due to weather or astronomical phenomena.
Yes, absolutely. And the fact that, quite frankly, a lot of times people aren't familiar with this stuff, you know? Yeah. I'm not saying that Kenneth Arnold was not a good pilot, but Kenneth Arnold was not a meteorologist, you know? He was not familiar with a temperature inversion like that.
Well, I think that's a really important part of this, is where I think we have a lot of really, really intelligent people up in the air flying these machines that are very difficult to fly. I could never do it. Like, these are people way smarter than me.
Right.
And so we're watching these really intelligent people, highly trained, make these mistakes only because they're not super knowledgeable about one other field of study, which is meteorology. So I think we're like very quick to be like, oh, well, he must be right because he's so smart and he's up there all the time. That doesn't mean he knows everything, though.
That's very true. I mean, it's one of the things that is, I'm a little critical about the disclosure movement and people like Lou Elizondo and these other people who are coming forward, Jay Stratton, who's associated with the Age of Disclosure, which we're going to talk about probably on the next 40. But just because you are good at one thing, just because you work in the military and you are familiar with a certain type of intelligence or something like that, doesn't mean that you know everything. It doesn't mean that you know meteorological events, doesn't mean that you know cryptozoological events. You know, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily great at spotting a hoax.
Or know everything about photography.
Right, exactly.
Yes. Or, I mean, that another thing we'll also probably get into, that you even know what's going on in other branches of the military.
Yeah.
Ooh,
That's
yeah.
very true.
Damn.
So if he saw these superior mirages, Kenneth Arnold, in his flight, right, we still have the problem of how did they travel so fast, twice the speed of sound from one mountain to another? Well, our assumption is that he saw a superior mirage at one spot and then he saw it at another. He never claimed to actually watch them go from place to place. They never saw them travel there, only that they were here and then they were there 2 minutes later.
Oh.
Which could mean that it was something that flew really fast, but it's much more likely that he saw the mirage at one spot and then somewhere else.
That makes sense, because if you turn your head, it's like the reflection jumps.
Yes.
So Arnold's report hit the newspaper, the Oregonian? The East Oregonian.
I think it's Oregonian.
Oregonian?
What do you think, Katie?
Oregonian.
Ah, okay.
I think it's Oregonian.
Oregonian.
Outrule
Yeah.
2 to 3, Oregonian.
The East Oregonian. Oregonian. Out of Pendleton, Oregon. And that was the first place to describe the objects as, quote, like a saucer thrown across the water. And from there, the term flying saucer was born, and with it, a whole genre of science fiction. This was further cemented in the public consciousness by the crashes at Roswell and Aztec, New Mexico. For a full history on these, check out our very extensive Aztec saucer crash series. But in short, also, Katie, we can get into Roswell very briefly. I'm sure you're familiar with Roswell. Are you familiar with Aztec?
I am.
Okay.
But I haven't read up on it recently. Like, I know about it, though.
Okay, yeah. So Roswell happened first, crash in 1947.
Yep.
Aztec happened the following year. A lot of the mythology that surrounds Roswell actually originated from Aztec, because Roswell was a crash. We now believe that it was Project Mogul, which was a balloon project that essentially a surveillance balloon that the military was working on. But for Aztec, there were a pair of grifters. Well, just call it like it is. There were a pair of grifters who were claiming to sell alien technology in the form of dowsing rods that they had salvaged off this supposedly crashed spaceship. And they brought a whole bunch of the mythology out, like the bodies that were recovered and all of this technology and all of this stuff. And so for a long time, people who were telling stories about Aztec. And then in about the 1970s, there was this guy named Robert Spencer Carr who was regurgitating these crashed saucer stories, talking about Aztec, and finally got called out on it. And people said, well, it actually turns out that those grifters got arrested and sent to prison, and all of their story was bullshit. And Robert Spencer Carr pivoted then and said, oh, I must have gotten my dates wrong. It wasn't Aztec, the Aztec crash that I was talking about. It was Roswell. Then in 1980, a book was published in Roswell, and the whole thing was legendary after that.
But if I'm remembering correctly, the Roswell crash was confusing, but like pretty quickly identified as a weather balloon.
Right.
Like by the Army. They were just
Right.
like, oh, yep, sorry, our bad.
Yep. From the period of 1947 to probably like 1977, Roswell was not really news. It wasn't until the 70s when we had this kind of cycle, and then UFOs were back in the news in the 70s, and that's when people started doing digging back into the history, and that's where they started unearthing Roswell and Aztec, not knowing the history behind these things, and brought them back into the forefront. But yeah, almost immediately, if you go back into the reporting and stuff, Roswell, it happened. A couple days later, they were like, oh yeah, it was a crashed weather balloon. Super weird. And then it's just quiet. There were no bodies. There was none of this stuff. So these incidents spawned this saucer craze and was further influenced by the media and I think the continuing space race. Because at the same time, we, the US and Russia, are throwing shit up into the sky. It's in the forefront of everybody's mind that we're doing explorations into space. With the general public becoming so hyper-focused on the stars and beyond, the 1950s and 60s in media were all about rockets, aliens, futuristic technology, lots of magnets, lots of computers. We were just getting into all of this shit. And meanwhile, you have the US government with their own concerns. Now we're talking the Cold War. post-World War II, we enter into the Cold War. We're developing aircrafts that would ultimately pave the way for things like the stealth bomber, for unmanned drones. And they didn't come from nowhere, you know? There was so many decades of research and development that were done on these flying crafts, and then also unmanned missiles. And so there were all these iterations and developments. Katie, have you ever seen the Avro car?
No.
You should
the Avro
you
car?
should Google the Avro car right now, actually, because
Okay.
if you want to see a real life flying saucer, this is a real thing that was being developed in, I think, the 1960s. It looks like a spaceship.
Okay, yeah. Yes. Well, also in the 40s was when they were starting to build guided missiles, so unmanned missiles. But they also, during World War II, the Nazis had developed what they called the America bomber. It was a plane that could reach the US from Europe, and it looked like a flightless wing. It looked like what we would call now like a flying saucer or spacecraft. And so the US had actually captured one. They never got it to work, but the US had captured one after World War II and was studying it. And also during the 40s and 50s, the Navy was working on a plane called the Flying Flapjack.
Oh, yeah.
Which
That's one of my favorites, these breakfast cereal
Yes.
planes.
Yes. And like the program ultimately got scrapped, but during the 40s and early 50s, it wasn't just the space race, there was an arms race, and both the Soviets and the US were actively building, very secretively, new planes, new forms of technology all the time. So it was like a very real fear that things that people were seeing were potentially unknown technology of the enemy, essentially.
Absolutely, because now you have the public reporting, hey, I saw this weird triangular shaped craft in the sky, which I assume is kind of like this America bomber, right? It looks a bit like a stealth bomber.
Looks like a stealth bomber, yeah.
You have the public reporting that. The US government, Department of Defense, looks at that and says, hey, we didn't have any planes in that region at that time. What the fuck is this thing? Is this someone, are they doing surveillance on us? Are they actually running nefarious activities? Is this clandestine? What's going on? And remember, the Cold War is in full swing, right? Everybody's concerned about what the Soviets are doing. Mm-hmm. So the US government opened a research program to log and report any sightings of these unusual crafts that are in the sky. This was originally dubbed Project Sign, then later renamed to Project Grudge and Project Saucer, before ultimately being called everybody's favorite Project Blue Book. And we talk a little bit, we've talked about Project Blue Book here and there throughout a lot of this podcast, but Project Blue Book was the third kind of iteration of this project. It was the biggest of all of them, and it essentially took all of these reports from public, from military personnel, from just anybody they could kind of get their hands on, and they studied them and they researched them to try to figure out, really, are they a threat? It was never like necessarily what are they? It was always, are they threatening to the US?
Honestly, that's why Project Sign and Project Grudge both sort of wound down before then getting rebooted, was that things were determined to not be a threat, essentially. So they were like, well, we're not really sure what they are. They could identify some of them, but the ones that they couldn't identify didn't appear to be a threat, and therefore they would decide, oh, this isn't worth our time. And it would sort of like sit quietly in like bureaucratic no man's land until something else would happen or someone new would get an interest in it, and they would be like, we should probably look into that again. And then it would sort of restart all over again.
Is that why it changed names?
So
Kind of.
Sort of. They kind of had different focuses, but not completely. So Katie, you might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that Project Sign was initially like, hey, there's weird shit in the sky. Let's figure out what's going on. Project Grudge, which then became Project Saucer, was actually more to study the way that the public perceived them and that essentially how people thought about them and whether that was going to be a concern going forward. So it was more like the public opinion of it. And then Blue Book was back to, are these a threat?
Yeah, my understanding is that Project Sign was like literal first flying saucer age. They were just like, what the fuck is happening? We need to look at this. And that was the one, actually. Project Sign was the one that was publicly known as Flying Saucer because there was an article, or as Project Saucer, because there was an article in the Saturday Evening Post that the government gave to the Saturday Evening Post about what they were doing. And they didn't want to give the actual secret code name of Project Sign. So they called it Project Saucer.
Oh, okay.
And that was just like the initial, like, what's going on? And then Project Grudge, I think they started to get more like scientific about it. And they were actually curious to figure out what these things potentially were. The person who was in charge of it, Ruppelt, he actually would unassign people to the project if they were too pro or too con. Like, if they were like, this actually definitely isn't like interplanetary, he would be like, no. And if they were like, this definitely is interplanetary, he would be like, no, you can't be here. Like, his whole thing was like, we're just going to look at it and we're going to ask people and we're going to talk to the experts and then we're going to categorize it. We know what it is. We don't have enough evidence to determine, or we have enough evidence, but we don't know what it is. Those were like, that was like his thing.
That's so refreshing.
Isn't it?
Yeah. And then Grudge turned into Project Blue Book, which, as you said, Matt, it was like threat determination and also scientific rigor. They really tried to get everyone together. Engineers, medical people, psychologists, like astronomers, weather, like meteorologists, everyone, to sort of look at it from every angle and be like, what are we missing? What could this be?
Cool.
And this, at this point, as Katie, as you said, so Saucer had gone public, Sign had gone public, but Project Blue Book was still kind of clandestine. It wasn't, they weren't very cavalier about talking about it. And so every now and then, though, because, you know, the government's a little leaky, things would make their way to the public. And by like 1960s-ish, you have this former Marine Corps naval aviator named Donald Kehoe, who got his hands on a project brief from Blue Book. He was concerned about the fact that the government was keeping these secrets from the American people. Now, Kehoe himself is a bit of a dreamer type personality. He had written a series of speculative fiction books about a self-inserted flying ace with supernatural powers. So, you know, he gets Blue Book and he's like, well, this is kind of right up my alley. Like, I'm into this stuff. It's a little bit weird, a little bit off-centered. Like, it's perfect for him. He dives into it.
Yeah. I also want to just jump in to say, though, that like 100%, he was a short fiction writer of these like speculative stories, famously, actually. Like, he had published several books or like stories in magazines. But he also was a professional aviator. He was one of the US's first aviation experts. Like, he learned how to fly in the 19-teens. And then he also, during World War II, he was in the military. And during World War II, he reactivated into the military and was training pilots. And then was still in the military after World War II. He rose to the rank of major. So, like, I just want to add, like, that little extra context about him. Like, he is a dreamer, but he also does know something about aviation more than the average person.
Yeah.
No, you're right. Aviator, very much interested in this type of aeronautics research, all of that stuff. He ends up partnered with Thomas Townsend Brown, and together they established this group called the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, or NICAP. We're going to go through a lot of acronyms because ufologists love acronyms. The government loves acronyms. So, they're just all over the place. A form letter from Kehoe to a potential subscriber explained that the group would publish a monthly magazine with articles on their findings. And they encouraged members of NICAP to set up their own local chapters as a way of reporting these sightings that could then be funneled, I guess, to Project Blue Book, but at least to have some reporting chain of command.
This is just like what they're doing, what they're trying to advocate for right now in the government.
It is.
So,
Yeah.
are you telling me that this existed back then and then it kind of just stopped and now they're trying to reinstate it? Or do you think there's always been some kind of, are they making today, current events, are they making up a problem that doesn't exist? Or?
I don't think I know.
Oh, interesting.
I'm inclined to believe the pilots who are coming forward and saying there's no reporting system for
me too.
this. Yeah. But I also don't know because, Project Blue Book was not exactly off the books, but it was a secret project. So I don't know how many people knew about Project Blue Book and knew that they could report to Project Blue Book, because Blue Book was more of we're going to find the incidents and we're going to research them, not here's a form that you use to submit your incident to Project Blue Book. And that's kind of the difference between NICAP and Blue Book.
I think Blue Book, it did have forums, and I think people knew to give things to Project Blue Book, but it was higher up, right? I'm making this up, but it's so-and-so at the Army knew that if someone reported something to the Army about an unidentified flying object, that they would take that report and they would send it to Project Blue Book. But it's not every pilot in the Army knew, if I see something, I'll send it to Project Blue Book. Some people knew about it. Not everyone knew about it. And yeah, they were going out and collecting their own things. Mm-hmm. So it's very unclear what the chain of command was, chain of reporting was for these things.
Yeah. That makes sense. And I think that's what they're trying to do today, is trying to make it so that every single person has that ability to go up the chain and talk and report things, even you and me probably, right? Everybody.
One of Ryan Graves, who's a big advocate for this, one of his things is commercial pilots. Commercial pilots who see things don't have any way to report it, and they really should.
Yeah.
They're in the air more than our military pilots, especially across domestic airspace. So that kind of stuff is what they're advocating for. My guess is, and I'm not in the military. I'm speaking just entirely off my own assumptions. My guess is that there is some form of reporting that is out there, and there is probably some oversight, just probably similar to Blue Book. It might be a little difficult to figure out how to go about doing it and how to go about contacting them.
Okay.
And that was the difference when it came to NICAP, because for NICAP, they were okay, we're going to give the public a way to report their sightings and at least get them collected somewhere so we can finally have a sense of how many people are seeing shit in the sky. Unfortunately, NICAP also mishandled a whole bunch of funds. And so within 3 months, Thomas Townsend Brown was removed from the board of directors because he was so inept. He was replaced by the former chief of the Navy's guided missile program, a man named Delmar S. Farney, who himself served for 3 months before his wife took ill and he had to step down. And Donald Kehoe ultimately replaced him and took over the entire program, grew membership to about 500 people within the first year. Despite the fact that they had 500 people who were contributing to them, NICAP was always kind of on the brink of this financial ruin. And Kehoe kept sending letters out to their members asking for more money, trying to keep the lights on, all of this stuff. while they were struggling, other civilian-run organizations started popping up, too. One of these was the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, or APRO, whatever, acronyms. And then another one was Skylook, which published a monthly magazine cataloging sightings. Ultimately, this takes us to about the late 1960s. The U.S. Air Force has spent 2 years analyzing the data that it's collected through Project Blue Book, and also civilian data from NICAP, from APRO, all this stuff. Person in charge of that is a man named Edward Condon. And he drafted a report that said, our general conclusion is that nothing has come from the study of UFOs in the past 21 years that has added to scientific knowledge. Careful consideration of the record as it is available to us leads us to conclude that further extensive study of UFOs probably cannot be justified in the expectation that science will be advanced thereby.
Damn. We got nothing, shut it down.
We got
basically.
nothing, right? Yeah, yeah. And I mean, our U.S. government funding is a big thing, right? Like funding, money is a huge thing. There's a pile of money that's going into Project Blue Book, and they're not yielding anything from it.
I also found a funny quote from the coordinator of the Condon committee. He was like the project manager, essentially. And he had refused to meet with UFO research peers when he was in Europe at a conference, and he instead went to Loch Ness. And when they asked him why he went there instead of like meeting with his peer researchers, he's on this huge US government committee. He said, he explained, quote, "It was relevant to UFOs because neither one exists, and it was important to see how they were studying something that does not exist."
Oh, wow. Burn.
And I thought that was like such a great little crossover quote from our our last
See? Bringing it all
series.
together.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Wow.
I mean, it's interesting, though, because I feel like the Condon Committee, that was the name of the sort of research group for our listeners, headed by Condon, sort of immediately it split into like the two camps.
Oh, yeah.
Folks who were open to the idea that it could be unexplainable, potentially interplanetary, something like that. And people who absolutely thought that that was not an option. It was not on the table. Everything that they were seeing was explainable, even if they couldn't explain it. And that's the thing about all of these projects, right? Is that there always is, at the end of them, during the reports, there always is a little significant chunk of the sightings where they have enough evidence to theoretically be able to identify what was going on, and they can't. And so I think that that's always the piece that a lot of people focus on, but it was something that was frustrating to some of the scientists who were scientists through and through, but they were frustrated that these projects would get shut down because they would say, no, like there is something happening here that we cannot explain. We need to do more work to figure out what it is. Like, why can't we explain it? And they would just be told, like, there's nothing to see here. As Condon sort of like put the kibosh on that final situation.
That's frustrating.
Right.
Yeah.
And Donald Kehoe was one of these people who, when the Condon Committee report came out, was like so frustrated and so beside himself because he had been an advocate for this for nearly 2 decades at this point. And now he's like, there is something worthwhile here. Look at all these reports that NICAP has accumulated over this time. And you're telling me that we're just going to shut the doors on this and close the project. So he was actually so critical of the Condon Committee's report that he pulled out of the committee before it was finalized. And the negative findings didn't really help NICAP at all. And membership kind of dwindled after that because people were like, I don't know, and you saw this schism, right? But the closing of Blue Book left such a bad taste in people's mouths, also because I think it felt a little bit like a dog and pony show to people. You had the government electing its own researchers to do research into these things, then find out that UFOs are not worth the government researching. And so it felt like they created like a false front, if that makes sense.
I mean, like somewhere to put money?
No,
Maybe?
like they wanted to end the project, so they elected a whole committee of their peers to review the project and then shut the project down. That was sort of part of the public opinion of it.
Okay.
I mean, it is frustrating because they did have some good people on there. This astronomer named J. Allen Hynek, who's yes, Hynek. Yep. He's huge in this space. He was on the Condon committee.
Yep.
But you know, it's like ultimately the guy who was in charge of it, Condon, was anti from the beginning, and so I think that lends to that perception too, that the government was just trying to wrap it up.
And priorities were different. Like Condon, he was looking at it, is it a threat to national security? To him, it was determined that they were not. UFOs are not a threat to national security. That's the end. That's the only question we have to answer. We don't have to answer what they are they a threat? Because, I mean, look, the U.S. government is nothing if not hypersemantic, right? Like, that was all his job was, are they a threat? They're not a threat. Cool. I'm done. Great. But the public wanted answers. And obviously, the U.S. government wasn't interested in providing them at this point. So the groundwork here, you can see how this gets laid for a civilian investigation and research group. But you have NICAP, headed by Donald Kehoe, that's like floundering. It's in these constant financial woes. Membership is dwindling post-Condon Committee. By December of 1969, an internal audit revealed numerous problems in NICAP's books and ultimately forced Kehoe to retire from the organization. In 1969, a new organization was incorporated in Quincy, Illinois, and that was the Midwestern UFO Network, or MUFON. Now, MUFON would ultimately change its name to the Mutual UFO Network in 1973. But in 1969, immediately following the Condon Committee, was when it initially incorporated. It was formed by joining APRO, or the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, and the subscribers to Skylook magazine. And they kind of stepped in and took over in the shoes of NICAP.
I don't understand how the government determined that looking at the sky was ever a waste of time, given that we have so many enemies that are foreign, that have weaponry and technology that we might not fully understand. Am I looking at this wrong?
You're thinking about it wrong. It is the government, that Blue Book, the whole thing with Blue Book is we have a bunch of reports. We have to determine if these reports are a threat to national security.
Oh, they determined the reports weren't a threat.
This collection of reports that we have, none of the things that are reported in here are a threat to national security. Therefore, Project Blue Book is over. Blue Book was never like, oh, we should get eyes on the sky. I'm sure that is some other operation somewhere that ran and may still be running. Like, I don't know. But that's the thing about Blue Book, is that on its surface, it seems that way. It's like, why would you not be looking for this shit? But it was never that. It was just, is this one very particular tiny little subset a threat? No? Okay, we're done.
Okay, I understand that. Okay.
I'm editorializing a little bit, but I also think when these efforts, Project Sign, Project Grudge, Project Blue Book, were happening, it really was sort of at the beginnings and buildup of the Cold War arms race and space race. So the US didn't know what was happening in these other countries. And I think as these things build up and we came to trust our intelligence more, it became less likely from the government's perspective that random things that the public were seeing in the sky were like enemy aircraft that they weren't aware of. And so I think that was some of it too. Like, just to add a little color to what Matt is saying about threat, they were just like, probably random shit that someone in the Midwest is seeing in the sky is like not a Soviet plane, because we're pretty sure that we have a handle on like what the Soviets are doing or not doing. It wasn't that like that wasn't still an active threat. It just probably wasn't a threat that some random person was like seeing and reporting to the US military.
Gotcha.
So MUFON's strategy now is to decentralize UFO investigation and reporting. Rather than having this established chain of command that oversees all these operations, which they're looking at Blue Book and the Condon Committee and saying, this didn't work. They now want local chapters that are going to govern themselves and conduct their own research, all of which can be reported to kind of like a head office for cataloging. This is more of a grassroots structure, and it allows MUFON to function more nimbly than NICAP or APRO, and allows them to respond quickly to sightings. And that's the idea, is that as soon as somebody sees something in the sky, you can get a MUFON operative there because you're talking about somebody who's local to that area. You're not flying out somebody from Washington.
Plus, they're familiar with the area, so
Totally.
you're already coming in with a lot of knowledge.
Yep.
That's great.
So membership exploded. Within the first 2 years, 38 states had established MUFON chapters. When a report came in, directors pass it down to the local investigators, and the local investigators are out there immediately. That's the whole idea. That's the whole setup of MUFON.
That sounds fun. You get to play Mulder and Scully.
It's
I want to join.
It's a little expensive. I was surprised how
Really?
expensive it was to join MUFON. Yeah.
What is it?
Was
it?
I don't remember.
It was
offhand.
just expensive to you?
Like a couple $100 to get your handbook, and you have to do the test.
Just a
and you have to do
one-time
the stuff.
thing?
Yeah.
Oh, there's a test.
Because I wanted, they send you a handbook and then you do a test.
I want to take this
There's
test.
Yeah. And then
your
you get a
favorite
badge,
X-Files
apparently.
character?
You
Oh.
get a badge to be a MUFON investigator. Yeah, I wanted the badge, which is why I do it. But
Okay, we all need to do this.
stepping into the MUFON director's chair is a man named Walter Harrison Andrus. He's born in Des Moines, Iowa. Andrus, he was an electrical engineer working for Motorola by day, and then by night he's poring over UFO reports. Under his direction, the MUFON offices moved from Illinois to Texas, where he spent the rest of his life. In Texas, he focused on cooperation with other agencies and organizations, and grew MUFON to be the largest UFO research group in the world, which it still is today. Part of his success is that Andrus really embraces the weirdness of the UFO movement. He wore bolo ties with alien faces on them. He collected toy spaceships, and he had them all over his office, and toy flying saucers and stuff. He roped his wife, Jeannie, into it, and together they put together the MUFON field manuals for members in their living room.
I'm not throwing shade on him, but he seems like if he was working under Condon, if I'm correct, Condon would have said, "You're too enthusiastic. You believe UFOs are real. You got to go."
Not Condon.
Rupert, thank you. Okay,
Yeah.
too many names.
But
I'm
yes,
sorry.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Rupert.
No, he was.
That's exactly right.
Very enthusiastic. Yeah.
He was too pro.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, too
Yeah.
pro alien.
Yeah.
That bolo's too far, man. Too far. You're out.
And he loved doing the field research too. He loved getting out there and talking to the witnesses, doing all this stuff. When he retired in 1982, he devoted himself full time to the study of UFOs. 5 years after his retirement, a packet of photographs came across his desk that rocked him to the core.
I bet he said, "I'm getting too old for this shit."
I don't think, knowing what I know about Walt Andrus, he never said, "I'm getting too old for this shit." Walt Andrus was always like, I'm there. So these photos he gets, they're taken at dusk or night. They show a remarkably clear circular craft with a bright glow shining underneath it. This craft has windows or portholes ringed around it, and another very bright blue light projected from the top. This is unlike anything that Andrus has seen. The photos allegedly came from a photographer known only as Mr. X. And the location of the photos was Gulf Breeze, Florida. In an interview with Texas Monthly Magazine, Andres would later say, "I didn't even wait for an airplane. I got right in my car and drove out there."
Coming out of retirement.
That's right. Well, I mean, he retired from being an electrical engineer, but he did not retire from UFO research until 2007.
Oh, I thought he was retired from MUFON.
Oh, no.
Oh.
He did not retire from movie. He was fucking there, dude, every day.
Oh, I thought he
Yeah.
was like, I'm done with this. And
Yeah.
then this thing came across his desk and he was like, turning on the lights, dusting off the lamps.
I mean, that would be amazing, though. That would be great. He pulls open the drawer and he pulls out the alien bolo
alien
tie
bolo.
and he's like,
Yeah.
We're
back
ready.
into it.
Where did he live in Texas? Do we know?
Yeah, give me one sec.
I just want to quickly see how far, when he's like, I got in my car, I had to drive. I just want
Yeah.
to see how far he went.
Seguin, Seguin.
Okay, for our listeners, that is 9 hours and 50 minutes of driving in 2025 highways. So in the 80s, probably longer.
Wow.
And just knowing what I know about this guy, he probably did it all at once, just like
Yeah.
stopping to down coffee and just go.
Yeah.
I was going to say, without cocaine. No, I don't know.
I don't
knows?
know
It
that
was
for
the
a
80s.
fact.
There might have been
It
plenty
was
of
the
cocaine.
80s, yeah, maybe.
The car might have run on cocaine back then.
He drives to Gulf Breeze. Now, Gulf Breeze is an affluent community in Pensacola, Florida. This is the tip of the Fairpoint Peninsula on the eastern part of the Florida Panhandle. Bordered by almost landlocked coves, Gulf Breeze boasts about 18 miles of waterfront and provides bridge access to the Pensacola beaches. So, all that is to say, it's kind of a bedroom community. It's a suburb of the Florida beaches. Not exactly where you'd expect aliens to show up for their vacation.
I don't know. I'd pick that. Sounds really nice. They got alligators being thrown through drivers.
Yeah, drive-through windows.
Drive-through windows. I mean, come on. You got the sea air. Everything
Yeah.
I need.
November 1987, an article hit the Gulf Breeze Sentinel, headlined by a photograph of this circular spaceship. Quoting Mr. X, the article said, "Let me reassure you that this is not a hoax. I saw what I saw, took pictures of it, and have given these pictures to you. I wish I can come forward, but I cannot, for while I have nothing to gain, I have everything to lose."
Oh, please.
Okay. If you have to say it's not a hoax, this guy needs to read Doc Shields' book.
He does.
You can't be so literal.
No.
Yeah, also, spoiler alert, it was a hoax.
Yeah. It's like saying over and over again to people, I'm a good person. I'm a good person. If you had to say it
Yeah.
like that, you're not a good person.
Yeah,
Yeah. If you have to ask,
Mr. X's photos had been delivered to the Sentinel by Ed Walters, a local contractor. Walters' business was building homes in the region. He's bearded, curly-haired, he's got a really big forehead, and I personally think he looks quite a bit like Matt Walsh, the co-founder of the Upright Citizens Brigade, and Mike McClintock on Veep. You know, nobody knows who that is? I'm sure some of our listeners know who that is. He's a very funny guy. He has this like gruffness that you expect from people who work in the trades, but it's also tempered with this kind of good old boy attitude. He's very sort of everyman too.
I got you. I see Mike Walsh. Yeah, Matt Walsh. Yeah.
Yeah, just like a regular guy stumbled across some photos of a saucer. Walters claimed to have convinced this Mr. X to let him deliver the photographs to the Sentinel, which is how they ended up in possession of a very credulous journalist named Dwayne Cook.
so here's my question. Did he stumble across the photos or did Mr. X give him the photos?
Okay, To fast forward a little bit, because there's already enough names in this episode, Mr. X is Ed Walters. There is no Mr.
Right.
X.
Yeah,
It's
Okay.
one of many aliases that he's going to use over the course of this story.
Okay.
Yeah. Dwayne Cook, the editor, agreed to publish a write-up of this Mr. X / Ed Walters encounter with the UFO along with the photographs. And he also asked the readers, share your own experiences. Did you see something strange in the sky anytime around November of 1987? So for the sake of simplicity, let's do away with any pretense of Mr. X. Let's just call it what it is. Ed Walters, this is his story. It's always been his story. Ed Walters' story goes like this. Late at night on Veterans Day, November 11th, 1987, Walters noticed a big blue light outside his house. He stepped out to investigate and was astonished to see there was a spacecraft hovering over his lawn. Obviously, it would astonish me, too.
I'd be like, meh. Whatevs.
It's blue-gray, made of dull metal. It's circular. You have these square and diamond-shaped portholes along its hull. And the light that he saw was a bluish beam that emanates in a ring from the bottom of the craft. And he described it like this. There was nothing colorful about it. No flashing lights, no beams coming from it. None of that Star Wars stuff. It was just a dull, gray-blue thing. Thinking quickly, he grabbed his camera, which is a Polaroid land camera, and he took 4 photos of the UFO. He had previously been using this camera on his job site to take pictures, so he's familiar with it. But he did claim, he wasn't an experienced photographer or anything like that. Still, the pictures he took that night showed this craft hovering near the trees at his house, glowing, ominous. And as he's focusing his camera, something struck him. And I don't mean like a sight struck him, not a physical object, but a blast of pure energy, powerful enough to completely immobilize him. He said, I tried to lift my arms to point the camera. I couldn't move them. They were blue. I was blue. Everything was blue. I was in a blue light beam.
He's like describing every 90s era candy commercial. Like, this kid's just in school and he opens his gushers and it's like, whoa, gushers!
Yeah. Oh, I wanted gushers so bad when I was a kid, and my mom was like, no, because she refused to buy us anything like that. She was like, they're too expensive. You're not getting it.
Yeah, they were very fancy, weren't they? Mm-hmm. Yes.
I would get them sometimes. They were, I liked them a lot, and now I think I would absolutely hate them. They're fucking weird.
They're weird.
Like, yeah.
I think about it now, I'm like, that's disgusting. Like a gummy candy that you bite into and then liquid comes out. Like too many weird textures.
I know. They marketed it really well.
They did, right?
They made it seem really great.
Do you remember Fruit Roll-Ups?
Oh, of course.
Yes.
Fruit Roll-Ups. I loved Fruit Roll-Ups. And my mom was so disappointed in me for loving them.
Why? Was she
Why? They're
ashamed?
so
Did you bring
good.
shame upon the family for enjoying fruit roll-ups?
She tried to make me Fruit Roll-Ups with actual fruit,
she
and I
would.
hated them. I was like,
would.
this is crap. I want the super sugar stuff and the little dinosaur shapes.
Oh, they did have the dinosaur
fruit
shapes.
roll-ups.
You
They
could-
were so
Oh my
good.
God. That was the best when you could peel the dinosaur off the
Yeah, they had the
off
little plastic and you would peel them off.
Yep.
I liked that. My sister loved fruit roll-ups so much. It was almost obnoxious. I was more of a salty person.
I know. You always have them.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Sorry, continue.
I wasn't allowed to have fruit roll-ups either.
Oh, I'm
It wasn't
sorry.
that I wasn't allowed. My mom was like, expensive, not purchasing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like sometimes we might get one for like a field trip or something, but that was it. Anyway.
Special.
Keep going. Yeah.
So we got Ed Walters. He's stuck in this blue beam, right? He tried to scream and a voice spoke to him. Although it's not clear if that voice was like an amplified voice coming from the craft or if it was something that was projected into his mental consciousness. The voice said, "We will not harm you." They seem to be trying to lure him into giving over to them. They're trying to make him unconscious or maybe actually kill him, but they're trying to like knock him out. So, summoning all of his mental fortitude, he fought back with his battle cry of, "Screw you." That's what he said to the aliens. Screw you.
Wow. Tough.
In response, the aliens filled his mind with images of dogs. I'm not making this up. He said
What?
the aliens showed him a series of mental pictures of dogs as like a psychic display of power.
I would think of it as like the other thing. Like, oh, this guy's worked up. Let's show him dogs. Humans love dogs. It'll calm him right down.
Well, I can't figure out. I also think it might be a little bit like that creepy guy with a van who's like, "Hey, kid, I got a puppy in here.
Yeah.
You want to come see the puppy?"
Maybe.
So, I don't know. Ultimately, they released him from their grasp. He collapsed to the pavement in a heap with only his photographs, his polaroids, to show from the encounter. So, this added kind of an air of authenticity to the story, sort of. Polaroids, this is what he's using, instant cameras. They use this special kind of film that combines chemicals and negative all in one. So when you take a picture, the camera ejects the photo, and in a few minutes, you have a fully developed image. That makes it much harder to fake than traditional film, where you wind it each time you take a picture. It's much easier to do double exposure on traditional film. It's not impossible to do double exposure on a Polaroid, and we'll come back to that later. But just realize for now that to the general public, this makes Walters seem a little bit more credible because he's presenting this difficult to fake idea. So after running the story of Mr. X / Walter's experience, the Sentinel received several reports from other people who claimed they had also seen something in the sky that November. One man reported seeing an object similar to the shape and the window formation as Walter's UFO. But in his description, the craft was missing the brightly lit bottom, and he claimed that it was chased by 2 jet fighters before disappearing from sight. The thing about Gulf Breeze is that it's situated about 35 miles from Eglin Air Force Base. So it's definitely possible that they had fighters in the air. And it's possible that whatever these witnesses saw was a craft that was in development or something like that. They also could have been training jets from the Naval Air Station in Pensacola, or a transport plane from Hurlburt Field 30 miles east, or a passenger jet from Pensacola Airport. You remember when we talked about the Jersey UFOs, about how many airplanes are in the air over New Jersey? This section of Florida is another one of these places where there's just a lot of shit in the sky around Gulf Breeze. There were other sightings of stuff too, with each becoming a little bit less credulous than the last. We have one woman who reported a light moving through the sky that gave her a feeling of it's just kind of out of place. But she said, "I didn't have my glasses on, so I couldn't see the form." You have another woman who reported her dogs growled at the sky. You have another report of a 7-year-old girl who claimed that she saw a flying bow tie. So, kind of inconclusive. There weren't many people who could actually back up what happened to Ed Walters.
You know what looks like a flying bow tie?
What?
A butterfly.
Yeah, that's probably true. Eager to kind of follow up on this research, the Sentinel contacted Ed Walters again and said, "Do you know if Mr. X has seen the craft since?" And of course, the answer was yes.
Of course he has.
So convenient. This amazing thing happened twice
It happened
in such a
twice.
short period of time.
Well, here's the thing. If you asked him, he would say they were specifically targeting me. There is this whole thing. And again, Ed Walters is a liar and a charlatan, and he faked this for publicity and ultimately for money. But there's a whole thing with UFO abduction and alien contact that it triggers this little thing that I'm special. It's great because the aliens are actually coming to you specifically. Of all of the other 8 billion people in the world, they specifically said, wow, EJ is exactly the person we want to be our emissary to Earth. And I think that's one of the reasons why people are so like into this idea.
The ego is powerful.
But how do they know? How do they know that the aliens chose them specifically and the aliens just weren't like, we're chilling in Gulf Breeze and this guy's out there taking pictures of us, or this guy's out there, so we're just gonna like blast him. This is my thing. I mean, I know there are other alien abduction stories where there are more personal stories that would make it sound more like the aliens have come specifically to that person for a reason or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I guess the repeated visits make it, when they start talking about the repeated visits, it makes you specifically the target. But the aliens could have just shown up and been like, oh, that one.
He looks like he likes dogs. You like dags?
Yeah. You just happen to be out on the beach. They're like, oh, yeah, we'll take that one. And then what you go out again because you're like, oh, my God, I saw something out there. Maybe I'll see it again. And they're like, oh, it's there again. Sweet.
Yeah, or like once you get randomly chosen, they're like, oh, you know, it's like any good science experiment. They're like, gotta test the same thing over again.
Right. Yeah.
Gotta go find that other person. I don't know. None of this is happening at all. But if it were, I just feel like, you know, I don't know why these people feel special.
It makes me wonder, if you go fishing, do you think the fish that you catch is like, whoa, it's so special that I got picked?
I have been chosen.
Yeah, right. Like,
It's like in Toy Story.
Yeah.
The claw.
God chooses.
yeah, just like that.
That was the cutest freaking thing ever. So clever. Yes.
I know.
So, November 20th, less than 2 weeks after the first UFO sighting, it reappeared in Ed Walters' backyard. He knew it was back because voices started echoing around in his head like a radio with bad reception. He described them as speaking, quote, some kind of African dialect, although he couldn't make out what they were saying. He ran outside, he's got his camera, and he again finds himself face to face with this extraterrestrial craft. No sooner had he stepped outside that the voice in his head changed to English and issued him a command, and it said, "Step forward and prepare to be beamed aboard." And he realized that had been the aliens' intentions all along. That's why they hit him with the blue beam and paralyzed him. They wanted him to come aboard the craft. He knew he had to act quickly. He later said, had somebody said, "Hey, Ed, want to take a ride?" I might have agreed to. But to force me to obey, lift me off the road, freeze my body solid, treat me like an ant or a dog? No way. Not in this country. It's un-American.
I really like that.
I was literally going to say, before you got to the end of the quote, like after the first part where he was like, but to force me? I'm like, oh God, this guy. And then he just said it out loud. I didn't even need to make an editorial comment.
Yes.
Yep. Ed Walters, true patriot, refused to come aboard the spacecraft. Instead, he took another photo of it. And the aliens spoke to him again and said, "Please don't do that." And then he took another photograph. And so this time they tried to speak to him in Spanish instead and said, "Los fotos son prohibito." And the standoff continued with the aliens trying to telepathically get him to stop and Ed Walters taking photos in defiance.
So they were Amish aliens.
Oh, yeah, because the Amish don't want photos.
Yeah.
I don't think that the Amish would have tried to speak to him in Spanish, though.
There's so many things wrong with this story. But if they wanted him to stop, why didn't they just flash that blue beam at him again so that he couldn't do it?
Oh, because they knew it didn't work.
Kind of worked.
No, it didn't work last time.
It was
Well, last time he took the photos and then they froze him and then he couldn't take any more photos, right?
But they couldn't get him to come aboard. And now they want him to come aboard. Okay. I don't know. I'm just trying to. I'm trying to find some kind of logic in here, and there's actually none. I have no idea.
All right, let's just enjoy the story for what it is.
Yes.
What else did Ed Walters say?
So the aliens go on the offensive this time, and started filling his mind with images of women of all body types. Then this is where I was saying, maybe they were trying to tempt him aboard by being like, "Hey, kid, we got puppies, we got naked women. What do you want? What do you want? Which one strikes your fancy?" Or they were just experimenting with like some early online ads and were like, "Hey, you want to meet hot singles in your area?"
Yeah. There are a lot of hot singles in every area, I think. So many.
Regardless, even in the face of temptation, Ed Walters held resolute. He hid behind a tree and continued to take pictures.
What a brave man.
Just a hero.
He continued to take pictures. How many pictures did this man take?
Ultimately, there will, across several encounters, there will be about 35 to 40 pictures of this craft.
It's a lot of work.
Oh,
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay.
He really
I
committed
didn't
to
realize
this.
there were so many.
Yeah, and this is over the course of 2 months of encounters. No, actually, it's a lot more than that. It was like 6 months of encounters, probably.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ultimately, the craft flew off. Round 2 went to the Florida contractor with a chip on his shoulder. As they left, they issued him the ominous message, "We will come for you."
Thought you were going to say, "We'll be back."
Yeah.
Would have been better.
That would be better.
More cinematic.
Yeah.
Yes.
You can just kind of imagine them shaking their fist in defiance, right? Like out the porthole, like, "We'll be back."
Yes.
Yeah.
This is how you know Ed Walters wasn't a writer.
Yeah.
Screw you. I feel like there was a better
Screw
thing we could
you.
have said.
I know. I'm like,
you.
yes,
Like,
I
man.
believe that the construction guy from Gulf Breeze said screw you when the aliens were trying to abduct him.
Yeah.
I think this is a good time to take a break from Ed Walters' narrative and just remind everybody that Walter Andrus, the head of MUFON for decades, has gone on record to call this case, the Gulf Breeze case, the most important in the history of MUFON. In an interview with the Sentinel, he said, "This is one of the most amazing UFO cases I have investigated in the past 30 years." And it's kind of amazing that MUFON takes that stance because we have to consider the case of Billy Meyer, who is another alleged UFO contactee and photographer, who had largely been rejected by ufologists in the early 80s. Meyer was a Swiss farmer who claimed to have taken multiple pictures of flying saucers on his property. Do you guys know Billy Meyer at all?
No.
Okay. You actually do. You just don't realize it. One of his photos was used to make the legendary poster that hung in Fox Mulder's office
Oh,
in the
cool.
X-Files.
Oh.
Yeah. And it's kind of an interesting little story because initially, I think in the first 2 seasons, they used an exact photo and then got sued and had to do a slightly different mock-up. So if you go back to the original seasons, the poster is different because the poster was actually like the photo and copyright infringement. So
Okay.
I love things like that.
Yeah.
I love when you find little things in TV shows where the first season, the pilot season, or the first couple episodes, the set is a little different or something like that.
Totally.
It's so fun.
Meyer himself looks a lot like the traditional UFO contactee conspiracy guy. He's got like the big wizard beard. He's got the huge glasses, the works, right? His photos are so iconic. These saucers, they're so startlingly clear that they don't even look real. And it doesn't help that they tend to hang out near trees, close enough to touch the branches and maybe be suspended in the branches of trees. Meyer would tell you that that's just a trick of distance, but he would be lying. It didn't take very long for his UFO model to get discovered, a model that looked very suspiciously identical to his alleged photographs. He then claimed that he created the model after the sightings as a way of like remembering his sightings. After seeing them, after taking the pictures, he made the model based on what he saw. And MUFON didn't really buy that. Meyer's credibility took another hit in later years when he started calling himself the seventh prophet and tried to convince people that the Jews were responsible for the coming end of the world.
Oh, geez.
Sure.
But anyway, the UFO community pretty much universally rejected Meyer as the crazy, weird fraud that he was. But Walt Andrus saw no red flags with Ed Walters. in the Gulf Breeze events. MUFON is on the case and totally believe that this guy is the real thing. This is legit. So Andres jumps in his car, drives the 9+ hours to Gulf Breeze, just in time too, because Walters is about to come face to face with the occupants of the flying saucers. But we'll talk about that encounter and some startlingly new evidence in the next episode.
Is that the end of part 1?
That's the end of part 1. That's the end of part 1.
Cool.
Yeah.
He gets there just in the nick of time.
Just in the nick of time. Actually, it takes him a very long time to get there.
Does he? Oh.
Yeah.
Too many stops at Roy Rogers.
I've made it seem like the stories are happening simultaneously, but they're not, because Andres finds out about this in, I think, January, where the initial sightings had happened in November.
Okay.
So there's a couple month window between where Andres gets sent the news clippings from the Sentinel. But first Walters becomes this huge local celebrity, but under the guise of Mr. X. As just these reports keep piling up, and they get more and more ridiculous as we go on.
He has nothing to gain and everything to lose.
You'll see exactly how much he has to gain a little later down the line. Yeah, that's
cool.
That's our introduction to this whole world and the world of MUFON. This is MUFON, man. This is what they do. I want to become a member. Let's find out how much it actually costs.
I feel like the world of MUFON, but like MUFON gone awry.
MUFON gone wild.
A MUFON Project Aquarius researcher level is $400 per year.
That's a lot.
And that's how you get your official researcher card with lanyard and your membership certificate. And oh man, you get all this swag. Hat,
cool.
mouse pad, bound journal, tumbler, stylus pen, lapel pen, Aquarius round sticker, e-journal.
Wow. Cool.
So
But do you have to take a test to get certified?
yeah, they give you a handbook, and then I think you have to take a test. Yeah, to become a field investigator, you become a member, talk to your state, provincial, or national director, get your copy of the MUFON Field Investigator Manual, then study the Field Investigator Manual, then take the Field Investigator Certification examination on MUFON University.
God,
MUFON University.
I love it.
And then they recommend that you mentor with a licensed MUFON Field Investigator.
Oh my God.
What a hobby.
What a hobby.
I'm telling you, I wouldn't want to do it because I honestly don't want to go talk to people that think they're being visited by UFOs.
I do. I do want to talk to those people. I think it'd be fun. I'm not really a people person. I was talking to Matt about this the other day, but maybe under the context of pretending I was Mulder or Scully, you know, I would talk to people that thought that they saw aliens.
I don't know. I'm kind of here and there. I was wearing my Slaying Monsters t-shirt in the grocery store. If you'd like to check out our Slaying Monsters merchandise and get your own Slaying Monsters t-shirt, slayingmonsterspodcast.com. Click on the merch tab at the top of the page. But I was wearing my t-shirt at the grocery store, and someone was like, oh, wow, you know, and is that a paranormal podcast? And we started talking about it. And then he talked to me about it a lot.
Which is fine.
And I thought it was really cool that like, we talked about this a long time ago, but it was really cool because I realized that there are a lot of people who really want to talk about this in their day-to-day life, and they don't have the ability to because I think most people are like very dismissive of it, and I don't think we are, you know? I
want people to tell me what they've seen.
Yeah.
I think it's really
it's cool. I think it's cool.
I think those stories are cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love hearing a good story of like, I saw something really weird and random. My neighbor told me a great story, actually, the night before I did the first 40-in roundup with you all, of him and another guy in my town seeing a giant fireball in our town, or like a giant ball of light in our town, like near the horizon. The dog saw it too, and they went like looking for it because they were like, what the fuck was that?
That's
They
cool.
didn't find anything.
Wow.
That's super cool.
Yeah, I don't know. I would really just like to hear what people have to say. I don't think you're crazy. I honestly want to believe. I'm very much like Mulder. Like, I
Yeah.
really, really want it to be true. I'm less skeptical than Matt for sure. I just don't have it in me to be as skeptical as Matt. But I have become more skeptical through the years. But that doesn't mean that I don't want to hear about it.
I think that, and this is where the division is for a lot of it, I think that we should research it and we should talk
Yeah.
about it. I'm the person who says, I don't care if it's a threat to national security or not, right? Like Blue Book, we should be looking into.
Mm-hmm.
We should do it. We should find out what these things are. Let's keep researching. Let's keep talking about it.
Yeah.
I don't think you can just dismiss it all. So.
Right. But a hoax is a hoax.
But a hoax is a hoax. And sometimes through the process of research, you get the Gulf Breeze encounter, which is an interesting story.
Awesome.
Well, yeah, thank you all so much for joining us for this first step into Gulf Breeze. Next time, Ed Walters is coming face to face with an alien.
Yay.
Good for him.
Yeah. Well, thanks everybody for listening.
All right, everybody, be safe out there.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Slaying Monsters, the 40 in History podcast. If you like the podcast, there's a couple ways you can show your support. You can tell your friends, you can leave us a rating and review on your podcast platform, or you can head over to slayingmonsterspodcast.com and click on the Support Us button to leave a donation. For questions, suggestions, and other feedback, reach out to us, slayingmonsterspodcast@gmail.com, and stay up to date by following us on socials at Slaying Monsters Podcast. Your support helps us grow, and we are truly grateful to have our listeners and community.